Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Sub250 Huma20. It's a 2-inch 4S cinematic quad or filming quad. The motors are 1304, 6000 kV, and on those motors are quad bladed HQ 2x2.2 props, PC props. Of course, it has a DJI O3 camera, as well as the VTX buried down here in the center. XT30 for a battery connection. DJI O3 antenna does move out of the way for packing purposes. USB port for your flight controller. Access is here at the rear. It's USB-C. And that flight controller down there is the Red Fox A30 45 amp all-in-one flight controller. The receiver I have right here is the Express LRS version. Of course, it does come without a receiver, as well as with the TBS Crossfire Nano RX. The O3 camera mount is TPU printed and it is soft mounted. We have these TPU prints all around the top row of our carbon fiber. Those dual carbon fiber plates are 2mm thick, and motor post to motor post I'm getting about 95mm. Our motor mounting screws are recessed, as well as the screws out here on these outside standoff edges, but not on the lower plate. The O3 antenna is plastic molded, but the receiver antenna down here, this green part, that is 3D printed. Pieces holding our battery strap, those are probably aluminum, some sort of metal. The package contents doesn't list it, but I received 2 complete sets of spare props, which I found the props to break quite easily, so having those spare props will be necessary. Also got an extra battery strap. We do get texturized battery mats, but oddly enough, I found that these are both formed to fit back here. With the battery strap looping around the battery, I didn't see a whole lot of purpose in these, but they do come with the kit. We also do get various nuts and accessories that go for repairs, and maybe if a screw falls out and you need to find that. We also have the slot to fill the back plug on the USB port, as well as some extra gimbals. These are nylon lock nuts, and one more point about those. It does come with a plastic GoPro mount that's molded, and that does go right up here. You can technically mount it either way, but this kit, as I mentioned with those nylon nuts, I wouldn't trust that mount and your GoPro to those nylon nuts, so I took some nuts, metal nuts out of my own stash to be using when I was testing with the GoPro mount. But it does come with the through bolt for the mount, as well as the little nut on the end. We also get a 1-pager on that Red Fox A30 flight controller, the pinout, and how you would connect other things like GPS and receiver, whatnot. And in the boxes, I also got 2 sheets of stickers with, branding and other quads by Sub250. The Huma20 weighs 147.66 grams. It's pretty much made for the 724S batteries. This one's Sub250 branded, but I believe it's made by G&B. I just think that this one is what the equivalent would be a G&B that's green labeled. But I also use this red labeled. The flight times varied marginally, but for the most part, I'll report those flight times during our flight footage. And with that 720 milliamp 4S battery, it weighs 214.38 grams. Adding the GoPro mount as well as the naked GoFlow. This is the old plastic case from Flywoo. I believe that's the GoPro 9, as well as its power lead. Brings our weight over 250 grams at 266.64. Gonna start out with our inside flight. I think this is probably where it's mostly going to fit the market, and the footage that we're looking at right now is from the GoPro, and then about 40 seconds in it's going to switch over to the VTX recording with Rocksteady from the DJI O3, and then when you see the Betaflight elements appear on screen, obviously that is the DVR recording from the goggles, and it'll all go relatively quick. But I wanted to give a sample of each one of these. I think that's one of the things I've kind of missed in my videos is making sure it's abundantly clear what we're necessarily looking at. Typically, I just show the goggle DVR because I think that's the most important. Also, it's worth noting that this has 3 different PID profiles. I am flying with the GoPro on PID profile 2. On PID profile 3, I got vibrations in the FPV camera, and my flight time started coming down, and the motor heat started going up. Same can be said with PID profile 1, but it was worse. And then when I fly without the GoPro, I'm flying PID profile 1, which was the one I felt was the best tuned at that particular weight. The 850 battery, while you can use it on this, you'll need to change out, or very likely need to change out, the battery strap, because it's just such a much larger battery than I think they had planned on this being used. And the Square 850 is a pretty good sized battery. Mainly it's made for more performance, but this is a 2-inch quad where you're probably going to be doing something, or you're wanting to do something somewhat similar to what I'm doing here. You're going to be filming inside where there is almost no wind. Uh, the wind is going to have an impact on this, but it's not going to be dramatically bad. But I just don't think it would work if you had wind for outside filming purposes with a GoPro. And that's kind of, I think, where they're shooting on this market is the GoPro type of small quad filming, because not many of our 2-inchers come ready-made with a mount for a naked GoPro. Can it lift a full GoPro? Yeah, but it's not going to do it very long, and you may have to tweak the PID profile out in order to get smooth video footage out of this. But I wanted to show you all three in this particular video because I did find that I could get smooth GoPro footage when I was using PID profile 1, but the FPV footage was very shaky, had a lot of micro vibrations. Let's move into our outside flight. Oh, our outside flight here are winds, because you are going to see this have an impact on the winds. The winds are 9 to 14 miles an hour according to the weather data. And I remember, well, I don't remember. I took notes. I have a little notepad that I usually keep by my desk here, and when I come in from flights, I make notes. But anyways, I could feel the wind down on my skin, so it's not as though we were highly protected. Of course, this time of year, as you can tell, most of the leaves on the trees have fallen to the ground. But I hired a service. They should be coming to take care of that. We've had so much rain recently that they did not want to come and take care of the leaves in the last 2 weeks. So they were worried about tearing up the grass, because the grass is still growing quite nicely. And you can see it there as I get above the house, how the wind is having an impact. Of course, the GoPro is not helping the wind profile of this quad. It acts like a big sail. But we will also have some footage here that we'll take a look at without the GoPro on the front outside. But I wanted to make sure that you saw some GoPro footage. We also got to see some VTX recording, just like we did in the inside. And then we'll have, last but not least, the DVR footage that you get to see. Flight times that I told you I would report. Inside GoPro, I got about 3 minutes. No GoPro inside, I got about 4.5 to 4:45. Again, all on the 750 milliamp batteries. Some of them were the Sub250, some were the G&B branded batteries. No GoPro outside, I got 445, so about the same, but I actually kind of noted that for some reason it was less, and it might have been because when I was doing my battery testing outside, it was much windier than this particular day. If you watch the channel regularly, you'll notice in my last video I was kind of whining about my weather recently with wind and rain. GoPro outside, 3 minutes and 20 seconds was about the flight time I got across 720 milliamp batteries. I think I did 4 flights in that particular case because I had 2 of each brand of battery with me, and so that's about the flight time that you can see, excuse me. And the throttle value that you see there with the GoPro is around 25, just kind of cruising around doing that flat sort of flying. We will next go into the faster flight that I tend to do, which isn't what these are designed for, but I always find it fun to test these things because at one point in time, none of this type of quad, could handle faster flight at all. They could barely handle slower flight. So I think it's pretty amazing how most of these nowadays, with our modern electronics and Betaflight, actually do quite well in various different sorts of formats. Let's go into that faster flight. So again, I've switched over to Profile 1 because with the GoPro, I found that Profile 2 on the PID profile worked best. This flight won't necessarily be very long. Like I said, you get about 245 to 250. We do the punch outs over the house, and you could kind of hear some prop wind up. So it's not doing great as far as freestyle ability, but we have a lot more weight on a 2-inch quad than we typically do. That's part of the prop protection nature that they have on here with the traditional 2 carbon fiber plates. And all those metal standoffs they have to have around the outside in order to secure those 2 carbon fiber plates and the prop protection. So this is much more traditional sort of prop protection, which we actually have gotten away from. I think Lumineer has what I think might be a pretty popular kind of larger cinematic sort of quad that uses the traditional 2 carbon fiber plates. So it's not as though it's a completely out-of-date design. I was just a bit surprised to see it because what we've been seeing is largely that single, more narrow or just lower profile of prop protection that's made out of those somewhat hardy or very hardy, depending upon your opinion, plastics that they've been using. And those have really minimized kind of the wind profile impact that would have on our flyability as well as the stability. I think it probably also impacts the flight times because you have less flat edges, less wind resistance. But this one should technically have less wind resistance as well because you just have the 2mm thickness. Of course, it's at an up angle because you're flying forward across those two different plates. But it does it reasonably well for something at this weight with only a 2-inch prop. I think it's something that I had to kind of keep my perspective on, was expecting it to fly like something much, much lighter that didn't really have the capabilities of even carrying a naked GoPro. We'd have to probably go down to something like an Insta360 Go camera on those others. But on this particular case, we're not flying with a GoPro at all. So this is probably in that market for those people who have that very specific case where they're wanting something in a small package that could also carry a naked or light GoPro with the DJI O3. Let me take a quick look at the website here. I'm not certain it's even offered with any other video system. I didn't note that when I previously started looking at things. No, I'm not seeing it offered with anything other than the O3. So you can get it without the O3 and then potentially add a video system of your preference, say Walksnail, HD0, what have you. The open IPC, I think, is starting to come on the market a little bit, although I passed on taking a look at some of those products because I felt it needed more maturity for people who watch my channel. Okay, our flight has ended. You can see our battery voltage, average voltage at 349, so real close where I like to end things, and our flight time of 2:47 in this particular case. So I did have a couple of crashes with this, specifically when I was flying a little faster. I'm going to fold this antenna down just for our filming purposes here. But I'm highlighting this particular because on my very last flight, last pack, curse of the last pack, I had a crash, and as you can see, these motor wires down here, all but one of them came loose, and the whole motor came out. Now, I have to be somewhat accountable for that, because after each flight, we should kind of, as our pre-flight checks, and these do pop out. They just kind of have little notches in here. They pop out all the time. Oh, I still got grass in there. After each flight, we should be, grabbing our motors to make sure they're secure and kind of grabbing our frame and making sure everything's secure. I neglected to do that, and I suspect the motor screws were loosening over the course of my previous flights, and then I got to that last flight where it probably only had a turn or a half a turn of threads on each one of these hanging on, because as you can see, these are recessed, but it did not pull the screws through. It mounts up again just fine. I grabbed some spare screws. They were all gone. So I even had 4 screws when I took off on that flight. So that, again, I have to be somewhat accountable. So I have a repair to do there. But the props do really break quite easy. I think it's those PC props. I think they're lighter, but they just don't handle any sort of impact. And even inside this cage, when you come down on the ground or something like that, you can see this one's pretty damaged. But again, this motor came loose. This one's somewhat damaged, I guess. You could call that fairly damaged. I don't think this one had any contact with anything outside of the quad itself. And I phrase it that way because that prop used to be on this motor. And it's going to be really hard to show. But so I came down and I hit real flat. That was my final resting point, just flat. And I noticed that my antenna wires for the O3, the outside black sheathing or insulation on the wires had been stripped off a little bit. I have to get my headset out. It's right down here at the bottom of my fingernail. And I have to get my headset out really to be able to see it. I could notice it outside more in the bright sunlight. But so apparently those wires moved on the antenna, moved up enough to get a prop strike or 2 or 3 in there. So that's something that we need to be aware of, is we need to, this is a very small and tight package. So when we do have a crash or our pre-flight geez, my tongue is tight. Our pre-flight checks should be to check these particular things. They did a smart thing in that our wire harness that runs to our O3, it runs between those antennas. So technically speaking, that gives it a little bit of a holster spot. We also have a 3D print down here with our capacitor, as well as holding on to our power leads that go up here, which are XT30, if I failed to mention that earlier. Let's see. And then when it comes to the MIPI cable out of the O3 to the camera, they wind it around this standoff. And a lot of that weight that I spoke of, and I mentioned this once, comes from all these standoffs that they've got to have all the way around this thing in order to keep these 2 plates and keep them from, twisting or anything like that. It's got to be really solid. So you get a lot of extra weight with that design. And I think that's maybe why most of our other companies have moved away from this design, is you just get so much more weight when you start adding all this metal standoffs, because then you got to add all these metal screws. but it does give you the most traditional propeller protection. If you bump into something, it's very unlikely that it's going to get in here unless, you know, it's like a knuckle or something, this sort of shape that's going to get between prop protections. And some people might want that. I can't say I have never once made any real world considerations to filming around subjects, animals, what have you. I've never done any of that. All I do is, as part of my hobby here, is fly quads, have fun, and then report my experience onto everybody via this video format here. So those people that do have a filming business using quads or drones or what have you, any sort of business, they could probably tell us better whether this would be a design they would use and what the specific use cases is. I am very much speculating on these use cases because, again, I have no professional experience with that. Your angle of attack is limited, so if you wanted to go higher than this, I could not get, with the 3D print in here, I could not get the angle any higher than this, which for this type of quad should be fine. I just wanted to note that you could. It does use 2 screws. I didn't test this. You could take 1 screw out of each side and probably get a lot more camera angle if that's what you wanted. I don't think it would have an impact on whether your footage would be stable and without vibration or not, but I suspect it would because it's still under the same mounting. You just want to make sure that other screw on each side is nice and taut so you don't have any undue camera movement. Also, it's hard to see, but right down there they have a zip tie that I think helps keep the coil around. When I say coil, I'm talking about the MIPI cable around that front standoff. Overall, everything with the quad is pretty clean, as expected. I'm not a fan of these things because they keep coming out. I suppose if you were of the same sort of feeling, you could take a touch of some sort of temporary glue and put it underneath here and put the screw back in and kind of get everything pumped down. Because I do find that these things come up quite easily. It doesn't take much. I would find them up after flights quite a bit, or me just carrying them around. They did print these with a little notch that should poke through. Hopefully that shows you that to some degree. And it should keep in there. I just didn't find that it does keep in there very well. But I had a couple of pretty hard shots. Obviously, with our camera set back here, in order to get our O3 camera damaged in a crash, something's going to have to come. It's going to have to be more narrow or come in directly at the camera because, you know, I think it's primarily this side, as you can see the damage and dirt over here. And then, of course, I, would tumble down and hit flat. And, of course, landing, we'd come in flat. They don't have any sort of landing items here on the bottom, so you're always going to be landing on your screws, which for some people just means that you have to keep an eye on these screws. Are they getting worn down? Because if you're coming in and you're sliding, like most of us, you should come in and you should just hover, what we perceive to be just a couple of inches at most above the ground, and then just kind of disarm and plop down. But if you come in and you come sliding in, which I get it, I do too, you could potentially be wearing down some or a few of these screws with each landing. So check them to make sure they're not too worn down so that you can replace them. So at one point in time, you'll still be able to get your hex driver down in there, and be able to still get a good bite and turn them and be able to take those screws out and replace them with fresh ones. But something to note there. That's really all I have on the Huma20 from Sub250. Doesn't quite get under 250 grams when you add the battery, the naked GoPro, and the mounting accessories. It gets relatively close. Of course, without the GoPro, it does get under 250, as I showed in the specs. I will have a link down in the video description to the Sub250 website. I don't think this is carried by any other retailers, but if it happens to be carried by any other retailers, I will try to find those and link those down in the video descriptions. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.